Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much, Auditor General. Again, I think given this damning report, Mr. Chair, I'm going to launch into a motion that I've submitted to the clerk. Ça existe dans les deux langues officielles.
And it's in both official languages.
It's evident that more needs to be uncovered after this report, with where it was determined that there was frequent disregard for the rules of contracting. And again, we see the same players complicit, with 70% of the contracts, that's $118 million, being non-competitive, 4 out of 28 being designed to suit McKinsey, 10 out of 28 contracts where there was not enough documentation, 17 out of 20 departments failing to meet these requirements, 18 out of 19 being off a national master standoff list, that's 76%, which did not have good enough justification, 13 out of 17 not having the correct security clearance requirements. 6 out of 23, that's 22%, did not receive all of the deliverables. And as I said, only 29% through a competitive process. In addition to this motion, which I'm putting forward, Mr. Chair, we see these in incredible amounts. Immigration, refugees, and Citizenship Canada, close to $25 million over 2 contracts. National Defence, $26 million almost over 15 contracts. Public Services and Procurement, more than $26 million over 3 contracts. I will say my counterpart, the President of Treasury Board, her fingerprints are all over this, Mr. Chair. Business Development Bank of Canada, Crown Corporations, which were just brought up, 11 contracts for close to $22 million. Canada Post, whom we just had in here in this committee recently, almost $27 million over 14 contracts. Public Sector Pension Investment Board, over $14 million of contracts, over 18 contracts awarded there. And a single contract, Mr. Chair, awarded to Trans Mountain Corporation. As an Albertan, I'm not surprised by this at all. And with that, I will get into the wording of the contract, and that is, Mr. Chair, I will read it into the record in English.
Can I interrupt before you do?
Yep.
I think we will, because of the time, just excuse our witnesses. I don't foresee us getting to the next round. Thank you, as always, Mr. Hayes, A.G. Hogan, Mr. Sways, Mr. Mariani. Always a pleasure to have you with us. Thanks very much. Sorry, Mrs. Continue.
Thank you very much. The motion reads as follows. That in relation to the committee's study of government contracting with McKinsey, the committee invites Dominique Barton, former global managing partner of McKinsey, Bob Sternfels, current global managing partner of McKinsey, Boyan Gerasimov, former engagement manager of McKinsey and former director of policy to the Minister of Public Services and Procurement Canada, the McKinsey Canada officials responsible for securing government contracts, the President of the Treasury Board and Department officials, the Minister of Public Service and Procurement and Department officials, Department of National Defence officials, Department of Immigration officials, Business Development Bank of Canada officials, Export Development Canada officials, Public Sector Pension Investment Board officials, Trans Mountain Corporation executives, Mr. Chair, and finally Canada Infrastructure Bank officials. So, as I said, Mr. Chair, we have just seen a damning report delivered by the Auditor General here this last week, and we must uncover more. Even she did not have the answers for us today. Even she said that we need to have more information in an effort to really solve both the incompetence as well as further explore the cozy relationship between the Liberal government and McKinsey. We need to get to the bottom of this, and so with that, I am putting forward this motion today. I am moving this motion today, which calls these witnesses in an effort to do that, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. We'll start debate. Mr. Kuzmirchuk, and then Mr. Genuas.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And, everyone around this table takes this issue incredibly seriously. We asked the Auditor General to come here and provide testimony here today of her exceptional work. We're very grateful for the work that she and her team has brought forward. This is obviously a serious issue. We absolutely want to strengthen accountability in our public service and our public officials and their day-to-day work. We want to see compliance of procurement rules strengthened. We want to see improvements made in quality control in the work that our public servants do. And we want to see, above all, which is something, again, a common theme that we have seen, whether it's the Auditor General's report, whether it's the Procurement Ombudsman's report, the thread that has connected all of those investigations and analyses is we need to drastically improve documentation. I mean, documentation. That's the thread and the theme that really has been repeated over and over through these analyses. But what we heard today loud and clear from the Auditor General is that 99% of the contracts that were studied had no political involvement whatsoever. So there were 97 contracts that the Auditor General looked at. And we asked the Auditor General point blank, out of the 97 contracts, how many had political involvement? And the Auditor General clearly stated that there was only one out of 97 that had ministerial involvement, and that was because the contract had exceeded a certain or met a certain threshold where that was required. So 99% had no political involvement. That means no ministers were involved, no members of parliament were involved, no elected officials were involved. This is an issue within the unelected public service and the public sector. Again, compliance with procurement rules, improving quality control, improving documentation. This is the task eternal of the public service. This is something that not only every public servant in Canada, this is an ongoing eternal task, but this is something that every public service in the world, this is the challenge that they face. This is the struggle. And so, the questions that are before us is what we can do. How do we help our public servants be the best that they possibly can be, deliver the best service that they possibly can be? How do they maintain the rigor that is required of their work? How do they maintain the highest professionalism? That's the fundamental question. It's not a question of politics. It's a question of professionalism, public service professionalism. And how do we help our public servants make sure that they meet and exceed the highest level of public service professionalism? That's what this is about. And this is what this conversation is about. Now, my experience working alongside public servants is that they are incredibly dedicated people. The highest professionalism. And they are dedicated, they are professional, they take their work extremely seriously. And they take the integrity of their work and their office extremely seriously. And we saw that, especially during the trying times of COVID and the pandemic. These were unheralded heroes that often worked behind the scenes, out of the limelight, long hours, long weekends, to help get this country through the pandemic and COVID. These are exceptional professionals. And the question that is before us again is how do we help them? How do we help our public servants, our unelected public officials, maintain the highest vigor and rigor of highest standards of professionalism. That's what this is about. This is what we heard the Auditor General say over and over, that there was no malfeasance, there was no any type of untoward motivation, but that there were gaps. There were gaps in the systems that do absolutely need to be addressed, because, again, we heard today as well too that the federal government procures billions, tens of billions of dollars of goods and services every single year, hundreds of thousands of contracts. I think I heard, 400,000 contracts every year. And it is important, it is critical that we have the proper airtight systems in place to make sure that Canadians are getting the best value for money, that every dollar is spent wisely. But at the same time, we need that proper documentation to be able to show our work, to be able to show the work, I should say, of our public servants, so that when there are mistakes that are made, we can learn from them. And also so that we can, again, take the necessary lessons from it and learn best practices from it. That's absolutely important. So value for money is absolutely critical. But we also know for sure that in those instances where someone does do something that's untoward, that we can hold them accountable. And that is something that is absolutely critical. But we heard loud and clear today from the Auditor General. It couldn't be more clear. The Auditor General looked at 97 contracts within 10 departments and within 10 Crown agencies, and found that out of the 97 contracts, there was zero involvement from elected officials, zero involvement from ministers, from members of parliament, from elected officials, except for one. 98%, 98.9%, 99% of contracts that they looked at had zero ministerial or political interference. And so this was an issue. This is an issue that is within our public officials, our public service, and we need to find out how do we help our public service be the best version of themselves that they possibly, absolutely can be. And what we heard today, on top of all that, the Auditor General was absolutely clear. The rules already exist. The rules already exist. The framework of accountability and the framework of rules and systems already exist. This is what we heard. But that what needs to change is that the departments need to make sure the deputy ministers, the unelected officials, needs to make sure that the rules are being followed. And we heard today that there are varying degrees of compliance with those rules. Some departments are better than others. So we need to make sure, how do we follow the leaders and not the laggards? And how do we make sure that the best practices are adhered to by every public official in every department? We heard natural resources is a department that had a clean sheet, a clean bill of health from the Auditor General. What do they do that's different that other departments and Crown agencies need to emulate to make sure that they're doing the right things? This is important, but that change, that culture change, that change is the responsibility of the unelected public service, and bringing that to bear is absolutely important, and it is something that is important to us as elected officials to make sure that there is accountability in that system. But as the Auditor General said, the rules exist, the accountability framework exists. It's a matter of departments and Crown agencies. It's a matter of Crown agencies and departments following those rules, which is what is important. And we're also in this conversation, we all also learned the complexity that public servants have to deal with. And we heard about, the need to balance. Again, it's not about creating more red tape. I mean, we're doing a red tape reduction study in this committee. It's not about creating more rules or more red tape. It is about balancing the need for accountability, 100%, but balancing that also with the need for efficiency to make sure that decisions can be made in a manner that is responsible, that is accountable, but that is also efficient so that the work of government can continue and so that Canadians can receive the service that they require. And so that's where we should be taking this next step as a committee. We heard it loud and clear. The Auditor General pointed us in the right direction, which is the need to speak with officials, the need for us to work with officials, to work with public servants, and to find out how we can help them do their work. And so that's something that is important. And again, we asked the Auditor General, what is driving this behavior? What is driving this behavior? Why are unelected public servants taking these shortcuts, not providing the proper documentation, not providing the proper quality control, not following the proper procurement rules? And the Auditor General stated that it's likely related to public servants either being either not understanding the rules fully, perhaps being overwhelmed by the complexity and the sheer number of all the rules, or again, simply that those rules need to be reinforced and repeated and ingrained in the culture of those particular public servants. And so that's what we heard in that's what we heard in the testimony today. We had some great questions that were asked around the table. I'd be curious to find out how we can deploy technology perhaps to help the public service. And here I'm thinking of, for example, AI, which is able to deal with complex systems and complex situations, help public servants to, again, make sure that they're referring to a checklist of things, items that need to be conducted for every procurement, no matter how small or how large. We asked questions about why do some public officials go back to the same well, go back to the same companies? What are some of the dangers what are some of the risks that we open the door to when we have these chains of non-competitive contracts? And that elevates, obviously, the risk element for those types of decisions. It seems like sometimes public servants simply get into a rhythm. I don't know if that's even the word for it, or a habit or a rhythm. They go back to the same companies time and again. And so how do we challenge that? And how does PSPC, as the overseer of the procurement process, how does PSPC deploy its challenge function? This is something that we heard as well today. And so we know that the departments are ultimately responsible. We know that the officials are ultimately responsible making those decisions, and we know that public servants make those decisions, but within those departments. But how does PSPC utilize its challenge function effectively to put a brake on a particular procurement that it finds troubling, and to basically say, no, go back to the drawing board, IRCC, or go back to the drawing board, CBSA, and you need to do this. You haven't fulfilled task A, B, and C. And so that's another question, is how do we actually strengthen the oversight role of PSPC? But do that without actually grinding the work of government to a standstill. And I think that's the critical element here, is we're trying to balance the need for accountability, the need for having checks and balances, but also the need for efficiency, to not slow down the process of government. Because again, the decisions that are made here, the decisions that are being made here impact Canadians, whether it's procuring PPE, whether it's procuring vaccines during COVID, whether it's procuring infrastructure investments, strengthening infrastructure, whether it's making sure that the benefits delivery modernization is moving forward so that Canadians and seniors can get their OAS paychecks, they can get their GIS, and so students can get their student loans, and so on and so forth. Canadians depend on a well-functioning government. And so how do we make sure, how do we balance that need for accountability, the checks and balances, but at the same time making sure that we're not adding unnecessary red tape? But again, the Auditor General had an answer to that as well. We don't need new rules. What we need is for unelected officials, for public servants, to follow the rules that currently exist, and that is something that is absolutely critical. And so I look at this motion that is here before us, and I'm just had a chance to really read through it now, and the member calls for folks that the Auditor General has already stated has absolutely nothing to do with this issue of these contracts. Dominic Barton, my goodness. There is everything that the Auditor General, everything that the Procurement Ombudsman, every other agency that has looked at this has said this is not about politics, this is not about partisanship, this is not about any type of friendships. This is simply about public servants, unelected public servants, not following the proper rules to its full extent. That is what this is about. And again, calling the president of the Treasury Board a minister, calling the Minister of Public Services here. I mean, again, we've heard time and again today that this is 96 out of the 97 contracts had absolute zero political involvement whatsoever. And so this is what we're talking about here. And so I'd rather us, as a committee, I'd rather us take the next steps, be logical about this. Avoid, trying to create what I would say a circus around this, and do the work of this committee. And the next steps be more focused and more surgical about who we, what is the next step of the work of this committee. And I think that's what's important here, and that's what I'm interested in doing. We absolutely want to strengthen the processes here of our unelected public officials. We absolutely want to strengthen compliance with procurement rules. We want to improve quality control. We want to improve documentation. I mean, that really is the gap. When you read all of the reports of the Procurement Ombudsman and the Auditor General, that is what they're saying, is that we need to strengthen documentation. We need to improve the culture of documentation. Show your work. That is what we do. And again, this is something that needs to be improved. And this is what the Auditor General and her work and her team's work, which again we applaud, she's really done us a tremendous service here, raising this issue, shining a light on this issue. And again, the Auditor General has pointed what is the issue and what is the road or what is the path to improving the accountability in our public service. And so with that, I will yield the floor and happily circle back again to continue discussion on this important issue.
Thanks. I have Mr. Genuis, then Mr. Souza, then Mrs. Vignola.
Thank you, Chair. Just very, very briefly, Conservatives have put forward a reasonable motion to study the issue of McKinsey contracting with this NDP Liberal government and to call relevant witnesses. The Liberals are trying to prejudge what the conclusions of that discussion might be. I think we should hear from the witnesses. Some of these witnesses are people that are very close to this NDP Liberal government. A former staffer who's also someone who worked for McKinsey, as well as Dominic Barton, someone who has been extensively involved with this government. I'm sure they can offer whatever defense that there is to be offered. The fact is, we know that McKinsey and this NDP Liberal government have a very close relationship. Contracts have spiked under this government over the last 9 years. There's been massive growth in the amount of contracts that McKinsey has gotten. And Liberals would have you believe that the government had nothing to do with this. This was all somehow, as soon as Justin Trudeau became Prime Minister, the nonpartisan public servants were way more enthusiastic about McKinsey than they had been previously. It was purely coincidental that this enthusiasm for McKinsey swept over the unelected public service as soon as Liberals came into office. Meanwhile, Liberals were passive bystanders to the things that were happening in the departments that they were supposed to be running. I don't buy that, Mr. Chair. I don't think you should buy it either. But in any event, let's hear from the witnesses and let's get to the bottom of what happened.
Thank you. Mr. Sousa?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the concerns that all of us share in terms of trying to foster solutions, improvements, and value for money in the work that's being done through procurement throughout the system. And notwithstanding some members' childish name-calling of the activities involved, it's important that we take the proper steps to ensure corrections are taken. And we've noted that there's been shortcomings in the system. It's been noted by the Ombudsman and by the Auditor General on previous occasions. Recommendations have been made and have been adopted. And we continue to move forward to find and foster those improvements. The value for money audit is something that's concerning all of us. And certainly the Auditor General explained that it wasn't just she wasn't able to say that there was no value for money. She wasn't able to assess value for money. And that's concerning, right? I mean, the idea is to ensure that there's a focus on the needs when we look for the procurement, that we have an understanding of the expected deliverables, and then the provided outcomes exist so that ultimately there is an intent of proper achievements with respect to those contracts and procurement to assess value for money. And the Auditor General noted that in her comments. And you know, some of the operations and some of the contracts that have been fulfilled and some of them which are still ongoing have had a need, and there are issues as to why we require those partnerships. Now, some around the table have also suggested maybe the civil service and they should be hired as opposed to being contracted. In other words, hire more individuals into the system and increase our bureaucracy to do some of this work. But the Auditor General in her comments also noted that that wasn't feasible either. And she made it very clear that there was no interference or elected officials' engagement or previous activities as had happened in the previous government. They haven't been reflected here. And that is important because the rigor of the system must be maintained. And she also referenced that there was nothing unique in regards to the McKinsey per se, because the situation had been addressed already. There were a number of concurrent engagements that were being reviewed. And I do like her recommendation for a standardized conflict of interest disclosures that would be broadly adopted across all departments to provide some uniformity in that regard. But there was no coordinated effort. There was there's reputable companies that have been involved in procuring contracts to the government of Canada, as in this recent government, in the government of today, as well as it was in the past. McKinsey's been used by other levels of government throughout Canada and throughout the world. So the purpose here is to ensure that proper procedures are taken in place. I think that's what the Auditor General is recommending. The politicalization of the situation is, I think, part of the motivation here, and doing more YouTubes and so forth on the part of the opposition. They'll streamline some of these activities as of outcomes of today. But what we need to make sure is that we provide greater integrity in the system and we provide further transparency in the system for the benefit of Canadians. not for trying to promote some partisanship or using cute phrases and so forth. These are real issues, Mr. Chair. These are real issues that matter to Canadians and matter to the members of this committee. And we want to make certain that we look at them in a holistic manner. We have reviewed the very individuals that are being asked to come before this committee have already appeared on many occasions, and we've already been discussing the process of procurement. We've already adopted some of the measures that the Ombudsman and others have suggested that we take. We have already made clear, and by those that are reviewing and investigating, that there's been no interference, there's been no criminality, there's been no persuasion of elected officials or ministers or otherwise. But there has been a shortage of skill sets. There has been a shortage of required training to do some of the work. And that is what has been reported. The size and scope of some of the activities are also of concern, right? We have a lot of contracts well beyond that McKinsey has been reviewed by. We have many others. So those initiatives and those monitoring systems must be applied throughout the system. And that's what I believe is more concerning to all of us, that those proper procedures do take place. And we are trying to be proactive. I mean, we've been proactive by requesting some of the reviews and investigations, and those that have fallen short, we've had corrective measures, and some have had disciplinary measures. In this case, with McKinsey, that wasn't evident by the Auditor General. So I believe it's important for us to move forward on those recommendations, to move forward on the issues that require us to operate the system better, but to go backwards and then determine, some of the engagements and trying to hold people to account, they should always be held to account. Every minister is held to account. It's their role in regards to the government operations. Now, some ministers of the past and in previous governments may not have been doing an effective job, but we need to ensure that we will always continue to do so and learn from the previous mistakes of the governments. But we will take the steps necessary, and I think we've identified those steps. And so I'm looking forward to moving in a positive manner to ensure that we have the proper skill sets, to ensure that we have the proper procedures in place, to ensure that we monitor them effectively, and to ensure that we have positive outcomes so that we can then properly assess that value for money. And clearly, the Auditor General said there may have been, we just couldn't properly assess it. And that, I think, is what's at the crux of the matter, to ensure that we do. And I'll pass it on at this point, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Sousa. Mrs. Vignola, please.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Well, listen, we can't be against apple pie. That is wanting to get to the bottom of things and wanting to find what isn't working to support solutions that are durable and sustainable. A number of the people mentioned in the motion were already met with last year and were asked very specific questions. And I'm wondering, I'm not against the motion fundamentally, but I'm wondering if we might be able to seek out something else other than information from the some tens of thousands of pages we have about McKinsey and in the Hansard that we also have. That being said, as I said, if there is a need felt to meet with these people, if people have significant emotional needs that they need to see them, we can do so. What I have a problem with is the the vagueness and the wording. We're talking about public servants from a number of departments and agencies. Do we intend to meet all of the public officials whose name is on a contract? Is that the intention? How many public servants are there? How many contracts are there? Are we going to meet each and every one of them whose name appears on a contract to try to identify the problem and whether they are somehow implicated in their work with McKinsey? I think it's not specific enough. What are we looking for? What is the objective? We need to avoid making the error that was made in the awarding of contracts, which is not knowing what we want exactly. I understand that we want the truth. We want to find solutions. We want to get to the bottom of things. I understand all of that, and it is essential to do so. But the means that we get there, is that the right means? Is it to be this vague, this broad, this imprecise? And it may even harm us, because when we draft things so imprecisely, we may get lost in reams of irrelevant information, and we may also sow fear among public officials about being punished for steps that they forgot, perhaps not even consciously, and that could make them feel distrustful of the committee. And so what are we ready to do as a committee? All of that needs to be answered. As I said, studying McKinsey, studying the contract awards, yes, of course, that is important. There is something very abnormal and unusual to see that 58% of contracts did not have justification. And I will reuse the word. It is just shocking. It's flabbergasting. So, nevertheless, how do we do this? And I'm asking the committee, how do we do this? Do we invite every single official from the departments? Is that what we want? Because that will be endless. And one last question. How many meetings do we plan to sit? Do we meet them all at once, one by one? When will we find the time? Will we wear out our interpreters and technicians by asking them to work all through July and August? Is that what we're looking for? I don't think so. At least that's not what I want. I don't know about you, but I don't want to cause stress and burnouts for that. I'd like to get the truth, but I don't want to destroy the people who work for us. So, yes, study McKinsey. Let's get to the bottom of things. Let's find the truth. But the motion needs to be tightened up. It needs to be improved. And that's what I suggest to my colleagues, is we need to find a consensus to make this more targeted and to answer some of the many questions that I've had in the last few weeks. Thank you.
Thanks, Mrs. Vignola. Mr. Jawari?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the statements that I'm about to make are my conclusions or my observation for the first hour that I was here. I left for the second hours to attend one of our colleagues' events, which we do jointly, Matt Generou, on Father's Day on the Hill. By the way, happy Father's Day to everyone who's a father. And so why am I saying that is I'm caveating what I heard for the first hour. So as I left, and when I asked the Auditor General, I said, okay, so have you seen this over the last 12 years of your study, the span of the 12 years? So it looks like the process inconsistencies or the process not being followed was through 12 years in a very consistent way. Some of that 12 years were conservative, some of them were liberals. So it does. I don't think it has anything to do with whether it started 2012, because the study started in 2012. If we had started 2010, probably we would have seen that. Then we looked at the departments and agencies and also Crown Corporation. And we saw, despite the fact that Crown Corporation is let's say, is extended arms, or arm length organizations, the same, and two different processes, two different systems, the same inconsistency existed. And then we ask, well, what is your conclusion? And the conclusion that one of the conclusions she could come was that this is a very complicated process. It's lengthy, it's cumbersome, and also, despite the fact that the delegation of authority has been assigned to the deputy ministers, they assign it to lower level, and probably the lower level are not trained, especially when you look at, the timing of when these contracts were being awarded. Also, I recall there were instances that the department or the ministry or the Crown Corporation was waiting for this master service level agreement, which I believe it gives them the flexibility to be able to get around some of these complexities. So the next logical question, had I been in the committee and I had a round, would have been, okay, we saw the peak in 2021 and 2022. What was happening during that area? And why do we see an increasing trajectory of expenditure? If you look at it, and I'm sure whether some of my colleagues pointed out to it or not, this government inherited a set of services and a set of back-end technologies, etc., that really needed attention, and it had a very progressive and aggressive agenda. And for us to be able to do that, we had to make sure what are the best practices around the world. And McKinsey is one of those organizations, not the only organization, but one of those organizations. Now, when you look at the amount of money that's been sent, and by no means I'm trying to defend any management consulting or McKinsey. I just want to be very clear on that. When you look at the over the span of that, the $200 million, and when you look at it, the amount of money that we spend on McKinsey was about 0.27% of the total money that was spent on all external management consulting. So really, I don't think and that's how I perceived what the Auditor General was saying. And I think she alluded to that as well. But this is not really about McKinsey, and this is not really about favoritism, et cetera. It was a combination of processes not being followed, processes being too complicated. People probably, if you look at some of those performance requirements, and I'm just reaching really out there. If you look at some of the performance requirement, if your performance and your bonus is depending on getting something done, and then you're cumbered and you are let's say handcuffed with a process which is lengthy and complicated, you're going to find creative ways to be able to get your job done. And that the whole concept of master service level agreement could be one of those ways that you get creative around being services. And it could be that, the use of master service level agreement, which is an umbrella, and then giving people, the decision makers, that flexibility to be able to put, some of the services that they require under that. So is that what really the master service level agreement is designed for? I don't know. And that's where we should be focusing. Why am I building that? Why am I referring to all of that? Is that I don't think the focus should be on McKinsey, because McKinsey is about 0.27%. The focus should be on these processes that they're very complicated, the training of the individuals, understanding the delegation of authority, and training the people, and then putting the measures, as Auditor General has suggested, in actually monitoring that. That's where we should be focusing. So if the focus of so-called McKinsey is going to go in that direction, and by the way, we're doing a red tape reduction study, okay? Why can't this go into the red tape reduction study and say, hey, look, let's look at master service level agreement. Has there been any cases that the master service level agreement has been used as a way to be able to expedite the processing? Why don't we have expedited processing? Why do we have 600, small businesses such as GC Strategy that have somehow mastered the process, the cumbersome process, and someone who's a small startup, one individual firm trying to get into developing and helping the government, it has to go to someone like GC Strategy. Those are the ones that if you want to focus on, that's where we should be focusing on. I had an opportunity to quickly look at the list that was given, that was suggested that we have. So Dominic Barton was already gone. He's been here. He made his statement. He was gone from even the what do you call it, the infrastructure bank. By the way, infrastructure bank, $1.7 million. I mean, I understand if you want to put, well, let's say Trans Mountain Corporation with $32 million, I understand that. But bringing McKinsey or bringing business infrastructure bank for a $1.7 million contract, I don't know. So then the current global McKinsey partner, he was there. And we asked him, I specifically asked him, I said, you know what, why all of a sudden an interest in Government of Canada? He goes, well, we decided as part of the strategy, we're going to increase our footprint in Canada. And if you look at their footprint compared to all others, it's not very much. Okay. And then I look at say current global partners of McKinsey. Okay, so I've talked about that. Then Boyan, former engagement manager of McKinsey, former director of policy to the Minister of Services and Procurement Canada. Okay, so this Government of Canada Procurement Services was one of the departments. But I mean, we don't need to bring this individual in. Okay, President of Treasury Board, estimate 8. President of Public Services, estimate 8. Department of National Defense and officials. I mean, what are they going to tell us? They're going to tell us, yeah, well, you know what? We needed to get the job done. We were asked to follow the procedures, and we found that the master service agreement probably is the best. It's interesting that I didn't see in here was the only organization who actually followed the process. I didn't see the only department, the 9 out of the 10, the only department they're very complimentary. I didn't see their name in here. Probably if you're going to ask anybody to come here, it would be them. Ministry of Energy and Resources, because they followed almost all the procedures. And they resort, well, out of the 5, they did 4, and they were so why are we inviting them? Because they're going to say, well, we followed the procedure. There was no influence. Well, the issue is these departments didn't follow the procedure. Why? It's not that they want to break the rules. It's just that because the procedures, most probably, as the Auditor General said, is very complicated. And people try, when it's complicated, you try to get creative. And if there are opportunities within the framework that's being presented to you to be creative to get your job done, you'll do it. So public sector pension investment, we've asked them for documents. We're going to invite them. They're not going to come and talk about any of these things because they're going to say this is national security. Trans Mountain Corporation, Canada Infrastructure Bank, I already talked about. As I said, why not the Ministry of Natural Resources, who could come here and says, you know what? We understand this is the procedure. We understand that there's a delegation of authority. This is how we document it, et cetera, et cetera. Then we could say, well, why wasn't this followed in the others? And this is what the Auditor General was trying to figure out as well. And this is what the responsibility of the, officials in the of the ministries and of the deputy ministers and the officials. I think I've made the point of what the focus of the study should be. It's on the process. It's on why it's not being followed, why some tools are being used as a way to be able to get around the complexity, okay, and gives them the flexibility to be able to do the job that they do. And that's where we should focus. And I also say, hey, look, we have a study. We have a study around red tape, reduction. Probably this should be part of that as well. And on that note, Mr. Chair, I move to suspend the meeting.
Excuse me.
Just a point. I don't think there's any such.
Yeah, you can't move to suspend. There's adjourn only, but not suspend.
I didn't want to adjourn because because
you
it's so
can.
wordy, but okay, I did my best.
Anyone else want to speak? Mr. Backrack?
It's an important debate, and I appreciate the vigor with which my Liberal colleagues are going at their line of defense. Noting the time, I wonder if there is a motion that would be in order that would simply allow us to pick this up at the next meeting.
We are running out of resources. We either suspend, which forces, basically we punt red tape Wednesday and continue this, or we adjourn and then someone can bring a motion to bring this back in the next meeting.
Isn't there a motion that we could bring forward to simply pick this up next time?
Well, that would be if we suspended.
But
We
we're
would
not
ju-
allowed to make a motion to suspend according to.
No,
The clerk?
I can suspend at the end.
Can I move a motion to ask the chair to suspend the meeting?
We get different advice on whether a motion to suspend from the committee is in order.
Astounding.
I can do either. If there's a general consensus that we'd like to continue this, we can avoid adjourning and then waiting for someone just to move a motion to restart the debate.
If you would like to, I think it's preferable that we
Sure.
continue it next time.
Our preference would be that we have a vote on this.
Yes, I realize that.
That we have a vote.
Suggestion? Let's move forward with your suspension and then have someone bring it forward at their discretion.
Well, it'd be adjourning.
Well, whatever you said just prior to that.
Can we get to a vote on this right now?
I don't think we're.
No, a vote on this
no.
motion.
No, we're not voting. No.
Can you continue?
No.
Well, I am going to,
Chair, is there anyone on the speaker list?
no, there's no one else
Well,
to
then
speak
let's-
on this,
I
but we're
prefer to be
running,
on it.
but we're running, okay, we're basically out of resources, and that's what I was getting at, so I'm going to adjourn.